Like what we're doing here at Cube4two? Click the like and subscribe button to let us know. Also, Cube4two is now a TCG Player affiliate. Click the link in the show notes for all your shopping needs to help support the channel. Alright guys, let's get started. What's good, Cubers? It's your boy Matt. I'm back, and today we got a video by request. One of our viewers wants to know that, one, they love our intro, and again, praise is the best way to get me to choose your comment. But the important part is item number 3. I'd love to see more videos on tokens, Reanimator, Aristocrat, and more. Well, I got you, buddy. Today we're going to talk about Aristocrats and feature our friend, the Blood Artist. But before we get too far into this archetype, I do want to discuss that this is another slightly lower power archetype. So if you're playing like a vintage style cube or a powered cube, just no, okay? No. There's more effective things you could be doing with your mana than casting Blood Artist on turn 2. So again, a lower power archetype, not for powered cubes, not for super high power cubes, you know, a nice flat power level, no fast mana in those cubes. When we think about adding an archetype to our cube, one of the things we can do is go back and look at old standard environments or modern environments and see where that archetype has been successful. So, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, Aristocrats became a thing, named after Cartel and Falkenrath Aristocrats. These decks would sacrifice their creatures and tokens in particular for value to the Cartel and the Falkenrath in order to gain protection and swing in with the Cartel, or to pump your flying hasty with the Falkenrath. So the idea here was to play cheap creatures and then sacrifice them to create tokens and gain value. We saw this deck again in Zendikar Standard, only it was black-green this time. Blisterpod was the 1-drop and he made Eldrazi tokens. When he died or was sacked off to Nantuko Husk to make the husk bigger, Zulaport Cutthroat would trigger and get that drain effect that Blood Artist is so famous for. And we even saw another version of the Aristocrat deck again in this most recent standard, which is like Ravnica Allegiance War of the Spark standard. We saw another Mardu deck featuring cards like Hero of Precinct 1 and Gutterbones as your 1 and 2 drops. Gutterbones is recurable, Hero makes tokens, and then Judith the Scourge Diva pumps your board with her effect, but also does that Blood Artist thing when your creatures die. So, what have we learned? We've learned that we need to make small tokens, we need to be low to the ground and be aggressive, we need sacrifice outlets, recurable creatures, and of course some kind of value piece like Zulaport Cutthroat or Judy. In Cube, there are a few Blood Artist type effects that we could play. The first 3 are kind of obvious: Blood Artist himself, Falkenrath Noble, and Zulaport Cutthroat. Now, Falkenrath Noble is not very good. The 4 mana is a huge drawback, and the 4 mana slot in black is pretty crowded, and he's just not good enough to make the cut. So in general, unless your cube is huge or the power level is really low, I would not play the Falkenrath Noble. Instead, I would add to my gold section. This serves as a guidepost to drafters, and these cards are just straight better than the Noble. That's Judith the Scourge Diva and Cruel Celebrant, which is another Zulaport Cutthroat, only it's an Orzhov Zulaport Cutthroat. So now we have 4 Blood Artist effects in our cube, and this brings us to another shortcoming of the archetype. If we're playing all 4 of these cards and our cube is only 360 cards, then we have a 100% chance of seeing all 4 in the draft. But if our cube size moves up just a little bit, say we hit 400 cards, then there's only a 65% chance of seeing all 4 in the draft, and the Aristocrat deck needs 3 or 4 of these effects to function with any kind of regularity. So what that means is we have to go a little deeper on the sacrifice value effect train. We could play cards like Fireblade Artist, Mayhem Devil, and even Lampad of Death's Vigil. Now, Lampad is a brand new card, and I haven't had a chance to play test it, and it's not as good as Blood Artist because you do have to pay to get the effect, but you can pay to sacrifice. So he's the Blood Artist and the sacrifice outlet all on one card, and that's probably worth playtesting. I'm a big fan of the Fireblade Artist, because he's hasty, he can fit into a Rakdos aggro deck anyway, and so you don't have to use his sacrifice end to still get value out of him. Mayhem Devil is probably the weakest of these three. He does punish your opponent for having fetch lands, he is very good with edict-based effects, but he's not as good, in my personal opinion, as the Fireblade Artist who's hasty, and he's not as good in like a generic aggro deck. The card is just a little more parasitic. So if we take these effects, especially the Fireblade Artist who I love, if we take these effects and stick them into our cube, let's say we play just the Fireblade Artist, now we have 5 Blood Artist effects. And at 5 Blood Artist effects, there's a 91% chance we see 4 in the draft at 400 cards. So suddenly the deck is much more feasible, again, in a smaller cube. The bigger your cube gets, the less good the Aristocrat archetype becomes, because you don't have the density of Blood Artist effects to make the deck function. But let's just set that aside and assume that you can make the deck function and your cube is the right size and you're playing the Blood Artist effect pieces. How do you push the deck? Well, let's look at Black first. Black wants to play its recurable 1-drops. Gutterbones, Bloodsoaked Champion, Gravecrawler, Dreadwanderer. You can trade these creatures in combat, and if they die, get the drain effect, but then you can replay them onto the field to drain your opponent again later. A solid 2-drop is Bloodghast, because when he trades, you can play a land and dump him right back onto the field. So again, a recurable 2-drop, very solid in the Aristocrat style deck. But now we need to talk about how we sacrifice these creatures. Sacrifice outlets are important to the Aristocrat deck, because your opponent might not always trade in combat. Woestrider is an excellent sacrifice outlet, brand new from Theros, and he comes with a goat token, and he can escape back onto the battlefield, and you get value when you sack because you're scrying to find more threats. I love me some Woestrider, and this card is good even if it's not in the Aristocrat deck, which makes it less parasitic and better for our cube. You can play Gona Turtle Bantu in the 5-drop slot, and when you cast him, sack 2 or 3 creatures to draw some cards, sack some tokens, get some value, trigger your Blood Artist. Yahini is fine. You can sack to him to give him indestructible. That lets him swing in a little more carefree on combat. And I love me some Rankle. Rankle is good in any deck. He's so good. And you can force your opponent to sack, and you get to sack with them and trigger your Blood Artist. Or you can use his second ability, and you can each lose a life, and you don't care because you're in the Blood Artist Aristocrat deck, and draw a card to try and find more gas to keep pressuring your opponent on board. And that's actually one of the weaknesses of this deck, is that the Aristocrats can run out of gas, and so it's important that you play really awesome 3-drops like Midnight Reaper. Midnight Reaper is so good in the Aristocrats deck, and he's fine in aggro decks as well. Because this way, whenever you're trading your non-token creatures, he's dealing you a damage. Again, you don't care, you're in an aggressive, Blood Artist deck you're gaining life off and on, and he draws you a card, which lets you keep playing creatures and threats and find the Blood Artists inside your deck. And if you're looking for another interesting 3-drop to play, Ophiomancer is so good in this deck because you can trade that black snake creature token over and over again. As a matter of fact, you can just count on your opponent just taking the one. Like, they're not trading with that death-touching snake because you're just going to make another one, which is why having sacrifice outlets are really important, because you can sack the snake token on your turn and your opponent's turn, effectively dealing them 2 damage every single time. But let's get out of black and move on to another important color of the Blood Artist deck, and that is red. I like Blood Artist and Aristocrat style decks in Mardu colors. So in red, the first end that we're going to play is really easy, and that's you're going to play the red aggro suite. 1-drop hasty boys to get in for early damage that later you can trade for life are all solid. You're going to have a lot of creatures dying, so Grim Lavamancer has actually been very effective for me in Blood Artist style decks, because you can exile those cards out of your graveyard and start dealing damage to your opponent to help keep the board clear. One of the most important things you can grab, though, in this style, this Rakdos aggro Mardu Blood Artist deck, are the Rabblemaster cards. Cards like Goblin Rabblemaster, Krinko, and Legion Warboss constantly making tokens that you can sack for value. You can get it to the point where your opponent doesn't want to wrath the board anymore, because Goblin Rabblemaster or Krinko has made so many tokens, and your Blood Artist is out that if they wrath the board, they're going to take 5 or 6 damage off of it. It just feels excruciating. The other thing that you want to pull out of the red section is really easy, and that's the burn. You want Lightning Bolt and cards like it. I know we're in the Blood Artist deck and we want to win with that draining effect, but being able to drain your opponent and then just bolt them for that last little bit of damage, sack your whole board away and bolt for the win, or use the lightning bolt to keep that early game board advantage where you can still press in and hit your opponent for a few damage just to whittle down their life, is really important. I cannot stress how good it is just to grab a lightning bolt, a lightning strike, to stack some burn into your deck to help with removal or to help finish your opponent. It's very, very versatile. The other thing you can do is you can support this deck from white, and you can have like a Orzhov Blood Artist deck or a Mardu Blood Artist deck, like I've said before. And again, you're going to want to try and pick up the same things. You're going to want to pick up the beginning parts of the white aggro package. So those white 1-drops that'll help you get in early and then you can sack off later. I'm a huge fan of Dauntless Bodyguard because if you can play him on turn 1 or you can play him later and target your Blood Artist to help save him from board wraths and other things like that. Now here you might notice a glaring omission, and that is that Doomed Traveler was very popular in the Blood Artist deck, and you can play cards like Doomed Traveler and Tithe Taker because when they die they make you the spirit tokens, and we talked about how tokens were so good. But in my experience, these cards are parasitic. Doomed Traveler is not great in your regular aggro deck unless your cube is huge and you're playing him for density. But we're not, because we're playing Aristocrats, so our cube is small, which means Doomed Traveler probably doesn't make the cut as he's only really good in the Blood Artist, Aristocrat deck. As for Tithe Taker, I played this card for a while and it turns out that his top ability is mostly flavor text. I don't know, my opponents just never seem to have a problem with paying the 1 on my turn. So you're really just playing him for the Afterlife effect, the spirit token, and he's not effective on turn 3. You play him on turn 2, want to turn him sideways on turn 3. He's not very effective there. He gets eaten, he gets chump blocked, he dies, and so you're mostly just playing him for the spirit token, at which case there are better 2-drops in white that you could be playing. So we're going to forget these cards. Instead, what we want to do is take advantage of white's token makers. So cards like Blade Splicer, Brimaz, Hero of Blade Hold is like the top end of the curve in the Orzhov or the Blood Artist Aristocrats deck. Like 4-drop, that's what you want, is one that makes tokens, kind of like the Rabble Masters. Now the best thing about the cards that we're looking at now is these are cards you're gonna play anyway. These are great white aggro pieces, and that's what you want. You want to reduce the parasitism of the Blood Artist deck, the Aristocrat deck inside your cube. Parasitism is maybe a topic for another day. Moving on, we talked about drafting the burn out of the red section. I don't want you to draft Swords to Plowshares or Path to Exile out of the white section. In my experience, these are not good removal spells for the Aristocrat deck. You're trying to drain your opponent out, so the last thing you want to do is cast Swords to Plowshares and buff their life total. Even a card like Path to Exile makes me nervous because I don't like ramping my opponent into their board wipes or into their larger threats. So when I play the Aristocrat deck, I prefer to grab the O-Ring cards, the Oblivion Rings, Exile, Permanent kind of cards. I know they're not as mana efficient, but I do like that they exile stuff and that my opponent doesn't get life or lands off of them. So that's kind of where we're at inside the white section. Now I do want to point out a couple of cards that I haven't mentioned yet. Maybe they serve as your Orzhov guideposts. Lingering Souls is so good, again, even if it's not in an Aristocrat deck. Being able to make the tokens is great for us, obviously, and then we can flash it back and make more tokens, and if a card like Judith is on the field, suddenly they're all 2/1 flyers, and just holy crap, Lingering Souls can be really, really stupid. And another secret tech card is Hidden Stockpile. I love this card. It is a card that people sleep on. I've had great success with it in my cube, sacking things off, and then when you sack to it, a permanent left the field, so you get to make a token, and it's got the sacrifice outlet on it. It just does all the things that the Aristocrat deck would want to do. So to recap, the Aristocrat deck is a lower power deck that fits best into smaller cubes. It's best supported in the Mardu colors, and it's best supported incidentally by aggro creatures in red, black, and white, and token generators in white, and recurable 1-drops in black, and so on. It is a lot of fun to play, but it can be very problematic if your cube is large or if your cube is high powered. that's gonna do it for today, Cubers. If there are more archetypes you want to see us cover on this channel, just let us know in the comments below. If you want to hear me talk more about things like parasitism in Cube, let me know that and we'll discuss that as well. You can catch me on Twitter at cubefortwo. Like and subscribe, do all the things, and as always, and until next time, shuffle up and keep cubing, my friends.